Hello, thank you. You are attending the Diversity and Inclusion panel at the Stanford 14th Annual E-Commerce event. My name is Yolanda Skiles. I'm your moderator. I enjoy talking about diversity issues. I'm a Stanford Law grad in '98, so I remember taking notes down up there. Feels good to kind of own this thing now, but so I always enjoy coming back to talk about this. We have a really great panel. I'm going to let everyone take a few minutes to introduce themselves. I work in Washington, D.C. I spent about a decade out here in the Valley after I graduated from Stanford in '98, and then I moved to D.C. about 10, 12 years ago. So I've done about half of my career on each coast. So I tend to come back as much as I can. I'm a privacy and data security partner at Baker Hostetler, and I've worked at a number of in-house and law firms. So I've kind of gone back and forth. So I can see this diversity issue from sort of all sides. So I'll just turn it now to Tammy and allow her to introduce herself and the rest of our panelists to introduce themselves. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Tammy Albrun. I'm Uber's Deputy General Counsel. I joined a little over a year ago. Prior to that, I was a partner at Covington & Burling in San Francisco. My practice was a little mixture of securities litigation and white-collar internal investigations. One of the last things I did was I actually worked with my partner Eric Holder on the Uber culture investigation. So, know a little bit about getting things wrong, and then have been working really hard to turn things around internally at the company. So that's my experience.
My name is Bernard Guignard. I'm Director of Diversity for Goodwin. I've been in this space for over 15 years. I started out my career in financial services at Citigroup, which you all know now as Citi, when they had their sexual harassment class action lawsuit. So I fell into this space as a result of launching diversity committees and so on and so forth, and have now moved from financial services to media and entertainment to Big Four accounting, and then fell in love with law firms. And so I'm excited to be here. There is such a thing, if we get it right, it's being in a law firm is like having a little family, right? So, which is a great thing. So we just need to work better to get it right.
Hi, my name is Alan Lowe. I work at Facebook and head up the intellectual property team. I started out getting into sort of diversity-related issues in undergrad. I went to Ohio State. Hopefully there's no one from Michigan here. But when my girlfriend, now wife, became president of the Asian American Association, and I had nothing to do with any of that stuff, and she asked me to become the vice president. And so to impress her, I said, sure, absolutely. And ever since been very involved and interested in these issues. I attended a program here at Stanford in 2010 for Asian American leaders, an executive program run out of business school, which touched on a lot of the issues that really have sort of raised my awareness around what some of the problems are and potential solutions. I spent 12 years at Juniper Networks and 6 years at Google before Facebook.
Hi, David Pilson at eBay. Been at eBay now for about 5 years. My team is responsible for our equity benefits and security governance work. And when I joined back in 2014, I was only African American attorney in eBay's legal department. So developed a passion kind of right when I joined to make some structural changes to the way that we hired and retained diverse attorneys.
I'm Megan Ray. I'm a principal shareholder at Greenberg Traurig now. I also went to Stanford Law School in '94 and had all my kids while I was in law school. So my first and primary focus was like, how the heck do you do this as a mother? I'm also the co-chair of our Asian Affinity Group at Greenberg Traurig, and I'm the chair of the board of the ACLU of Northern California. So law firms are way behind, or sort of the cutting edge of what really needs to be done. They still sort of talk about, for a long time, diversity, then they got into the inclusion part, and they haven't yet got to the equity part. So my shtick is it's all about power, and we have to sort of figure out how to diffuse power so that an organization can actually take all of its talents and grow itself in a manner that's really productive, not only for its bottom line, but for the people who work there.
Before we started, I just wanted to kind of get a whole of the room to see so that we can tailor our content to our audience. Like, how many are sort of outside counsel law firm folks? Okay. You don't count me. So 2. And the rest of us are in-house counsel, is that correct? And then if I were to just ask, are you sort of VP and above, executive leadership in-house counsel are in the room? Do any of us have, do any in the room have responsibility for diversity and inclusion? Great, that's helpful. Okay, great. Well, I thought that would help us as we begin to sort of think about this, because we don't want to talk all the time about law firms, clearly. In-house lawyers, that's our audience. But we wanted to also just sort of highlight how some of the problems or issues that you see in law firms become replicated in in-house environments. So I think we briefly just wanted to just sort of, highlight what are the problems and what are the issues as just a little bit of table setting. I think clearly everyone knows that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity/challenges in the legal profession when it comes to diversity and inclusion. I think after the recession, and then I will let some of my peers sort of speak more specifically on the statistics, that the recession actually caused the little bit of ground that had been made by African American attorneys to sort of reverse itself or to stall out. And then we also had sort of maybe more hiring among certain segments of people of color, but not promotion. So some of the issues are like, women versus men issues. And then you also have race, ethnicity, African Americans, Asians, Pacific Islanders, Latinos, Indian Americans, and then you have intersectionality and LGBT. So did anyone want to comment on just sort of, I guess, the statistical sort of numbers surrounding diversity in the profession?
Yeah, so just to set the stage, I mean, I know that most of us are in-house professionals, but I think most in-house companies, there's a pipeline of experienced attorneys that either come from law firms or other companies, and so want to talk a little bit about the stats in terms of where we are from a law firm perspective, because I do think that law firms tend to be a feeder into in-house counsel positions. And so setting the stage, there was a 0.7 increase in minority partners in 2018, 0.7%. This
Can
was.
I ask what's the baseline? 0.7% increase.
Right.
So what is
right.
the percentage of
Yeah, I don't have the total percentage, but actually I do. 4.5.
4.5%. 4.5 minority attorneys, and I think African Americans hovers around 2 or 3%.
Yeah, and so and that was the largest increase in 10 years. So the current state is that we're not doing very well, and we haven't really moved the peg forward. And so I know at the back end of the panel we're going to talk really where we want to spend most of our time is really solutions. How do we break down these stats and get them to a place where we need to be in a better place?
Yep. Anyone else wanted? And I just wanted to add too that I think there is a perception and there's also a reality that people of color tend to leave law firms and go in-house, and in-house tends to have better representation of people of color than at law firms. And so the question may arise, what's happening at law firms such that there's this attrition out? I mean, there is attrition out of law firms across, all populations, right? Because it's a law firm. But I work there. I know what they are. I know the good and the bad. So, but then the question becomes, why is representation sometimes in Silicon Valley as poor? And so we've discussed that too, in terms of representation in general and then representation of lawyers in in-house Silicon Valley legal departments. I will just say by way of personal experience that I was the first Black attorney at Yahoo in 2002. And I was the one and only, and I would have a diversity committee with myself and shut the door and go, okay, it's over. Now I'll move on. So then we had another brother who joined shortly after that, but the numbers were not high. And I think we just heard that in 2014, we had one Black attorney at eBay, which is pretty astounding. So the problems that we discussed about African American representation in the Valley, Latinos representation, and also Asian American inclusion and leadership in the Valley are some touch points that we discussed that are unique to, I think, the area where we are. So did anyone want to speak on that?
Yeah, just to give a little more, drill down a little bit more. I think sometimes when we talk about diversity, it's easy just to lump and have this broad definition. And you look at the ABA definition, and it's this like basically non-white males is diverse. And we look at those numbers and we look at what those increases are, but we're not peeling apart sort of men versus women, African Americans versus Latinos versus Asian Americans. What we're seeing is in the last 10 years is a significant increase in the numbers of Asian Americans that are entering into the legal profession. Some of that I believe is a destigmatization of the legal profession among Asians. It used to be back when I was growing up and I was younger. Doctor and engineer were the two professions you could go to. Everything else was kind of like, and now law is a viable third profession. You're seeing a lot more Asians get into it. The issues, though, that Asian Americans face are not representation. If you look at Facebook, if you look at Google and some of the larger legal departments, you're talking about 20+% representation in these legal departments of Asian Americans. The issues that they're facing are about promotion, opportunity, and development. And so a lot of people feel like, hey, I get pigeonholed because I am perceived as having certain strengths. So if you're Asian American, as an example, you may be perceived as being strong technically, very tactical, but not strategic and not a good communicator. So what do? You get sort of the back end work, and you don't get the opportunities in front of the clients and in front of to be presenting. So that then creates a differentiation in terms of what your future opportunities look like. That's true, though, I think in other areas as well. So my big point here is that when we talk about diversity, it's much more nuanced than just this large lump of people of color or people of diversity. I just spent a week last week in DC with the Hispanic National Bar Association, the IP Law Institute, and the issues that Latinos face are, I think, different and nuanced compared to African Americans and why they're not entering into the legal profession. So we just have to really understand a bit more, not just as overly broad category, but what the nuanced issues are.
I think you're absolutely right on that. And I also recall when I was in-house, a lot of our Asian attorneys were in IP. They were seen as sort of technical, sort of engineering types who were either patent prosecution or IP litigation. Didn't see as many as in M&A and corporate governance, and certainly didn't see as many sort of ascend the ranks. And I think also at law firms, that is echoed as well. I think some statistics may show that African Americans actually make partner at greater rates than Asian Americans, African American males. So the issues are multi-layered and complex, and they touch across different populations. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Tammy?
I would just say that, what Alan touched upon is sort of all the intersectionality. So very few of us have one single identity, right? I'm a woman, I'm Asian American, my children are African American, at least perceived by the world. They're Kamala Harris. They're Blindians, as we call them. And we bring religious and gender orientation, sexual orientation, all of these sort of multiplicity of identities. And we know that the legal profession by and large is still very male-dominated. So once you start to peel back those statistics that David provided, I think there was a statistic where it was like 0.07% of partners at law firms are African American women, and it's like 0.404% are Native American women. So it's stunning to me because I graduated in the 90s, and when we were talking before, there were actually more African American classmates in my graduating class at Stanford than there were Asian American classmates of mine, and that's definitely changed. But at every law firm that I've made partner, I was the very first South Asian person to make partner, and also probably maybe the first Asian female to make sort of the principal shareholder level, which sort of astonishes me because it feels like there's been so much progress. So I do want to touch a little bit upon the fleeing, and I think it was
before we get to that.
Yeah.
Let me just add. I think professional services in general, as people of color, check any box. You're always going to be the first in something, right? And you're going to build a practice, and your practice is going to be unique. And so you always constantly find yourself being the first. We have a long ways to go before there's just multiples. I think the other part of the conversation that we tend to ignore and really kind of try to understand is really the lived experiences based on the different demographic groups, right? We're talking about percentages and numbers because we're striving for representation, But when we really need to do is really have a conversation that's focusing on the culture of an organization and really unpacking the unwritten rules to success and how do you get access to power, how do you get access to work, and find mentors and sponsors. So I think as we kind of continue down this conversation or down this path is really like, how do we connect what that representation looks like based on the experience? Because people are leaving people. They're not leaving just the organization. And that's really the push and the reason why people have to flee, unless that's in your plan. And some people do have a plan. They're going to give this run for 5 years and then they'll make a decision and at a crossroads. But again, all of you have a unique experience and all of you have pressure points and triggers on what keeps you in your organizations and what's the threshold when you decide, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah. Can I just touch upon that? I mean, and this is kind of from my perspective, but I think law firm cultures are freaking toxic. I mean, they are. And I mean, I'm serious.
I think it depends.
Yeah, I think it depends.
It depends. Not all law firms are toxic.
I think it depends, but by and maybe we can comment on this. But how many of you in the room during your law firm life ever were yelled at or talked harshly by a partner? If that happened at eBay, they'd be out the door. And I really think that we really have to look at the way that we're treating our associates, the way that we're mentoring our associates at law firms at a very baseline level, because I'm going to be honest with you. As an African-American man and all the crap that I have to deal with in my daily life, I'm going to be darned if I'm going to go to work and have someone yell at me. So
Yeah, I can co-sign that. Like nasty emails, I haven't been yelled at, but I definitely had a Sunday. Yeah, that was what were you thinking? But I think there is there's radical candor at law firms.
Yeah. So
That was very nice.
it's a very stressful environment. But the only thing I want to add is that I think when you talk about diversity in whether it's law firms or in-house, I think you have to really take a look at, why is it that not just kind of diversity as a whole, but also diversity of the leaders, whether that's partners, whether that's the leadership team within legal departments or just companies more broadly. I think what you start to notice is that, yes, the numbers are pretty dire, they're abysmal, but when you actually look at the leadership, that small kind of cadre at the top, it's even more astounding. And I think, until we start getting more diverse leaders, I think you're going to have this problem, and it's going to move at a glacial pace because, in my experience, diverse lawyers, women, attorneys of color, LGBTQ+, all of us, we all have kind of like our communities. And to me, it's like that's where, when I'm hiring, that's where I turn to first. I look to see, I know tons of qualified, smart lawyers, and guess what? A lot of them happen to be women or attorneys of color. And so, and I think that tends to happen as well. So when you talk about like promotion issues in-house, it's like who's making the decisions? And I think, we have to kind of really start focusing, I think, in my experience, and I come from in private practice, I did a lot of compliance work where we're really big on tone at the top. And I think you really have to look at that top layer and figure out how do we fix that problem, because I really do feel like once you have that at a good place, you'll start to see more change more quickly.
I tend to agree. I think if you look at your executive leadership of your legal department, your SVPs, your GCs, direct reports, and most companies I've seen, like I've not seen a person of color represented. I've seen white women tend to ascend, but I haven't seen, just in my own personal experience, all 20 years of it, I haven't seen that happen, and it is a bit discouraging. Likewise, the management of a law firm, whether you call it the management committee or whatever, executive committee, the committee that makes all decisions about comp and all of that, those tend to be very non-diverse. And if you guys can recall, there was a New York Times article and other articles in which Paul Weiss, like, welcome, congratulations to these partners, and then it was all white men, and then the 2 white women at the bottom, and then it was like, the optics. And it was like, it's not necessarily, the problem isn't necessarily that you should have mixed it up and put the women at the top. Like, the numbers are abysmal, and that just triggered the conversation, I think, as well. So I wanted to turn to a little bit about, how do we define the problem? In some instances, companies and law firms have said that there's a pipeline issue. Like we don't have enough, quote, qualified people of color, women applying, or they aren't represented in leadership because there's a pipeline, they aren't being groomed, they aren't being mentored, or they don't have the right skill set to ascend to that second level, that next level of leadership. So I just wanted to open that up to the panel to discuss that. During our prep calls, that subject was sort of a hot topic, so there are going to be a variety of opinions on that. The question is there a pipeline problem? Is that a non-issue? Is that a red herring? Is that a made-up issue? So I'll just turn it over to the panel and allow you guys to jump in and give your thoughts.
So I'll start off, and then we'll take it from there. I think the conversation around the pipeline at times can become a distraction. There are considerations on whether we have enough folks in the pipeline coming into an organization. But if you're really trying to drive change, we need to really focus on what's happening inside our organizations, inside our firms and companies and so on and so forth. If we can't retain folks, then all we're doing is we're just replacing people. So the real conversation where energy should be focused on is what are we doing to create a good experience, to give people the opportunity to develop and invest, give them cover when they fail and make mistakes so that they do stick around, so that they do see a path forward, so that they feel like this is the right organization that they belong to. The other aspect of it, if you're really focusing on recruiting in itself, we tend to always recruit from these top-tier schools, right? And there's nothing wrong with it, but we also leave a lot of talent at the door, right? And we always define success based on the wonderful GPAs, your undergrad experience, where you travel, and all this other stuff. But, think about the work that you do. What does a person really need? Once they have the academic prowess and the brain power, horsepower, however your organization define it, you need grit. You need to have the will to, it's hard work. You need to challenge yourself. These are skill sets that we should be looking for, but we continue to figure out the GPA, the right school, you have the right pedigree. And so what you get is we look alike, right? Because those schools also have smaller populations of diverse individuals, whatever that diversity is for you. So, again, part of it to me is if we focus on recruiting, it can become a distraction when we really need to spend some time and energy. We've been at this work for a long time, fixing our houses, fixing what's going on culturally, because it is toxic, or we're just not really addressing the real problem. So we need to confront the issues and fix that piece as we also explore the recruiting aspect of it.
So I was ready to all just disagree with you based on our prep call, and the way you just said it was different than you said it in the prep call. So I'm really disappointed. So I'm not going to disagree with you, but I will say I do think there is a pipeline problem. So I don't think it's a non-problem. I think it can become the easy scapegoat to say, hey, let's just fix that and put all our attention to that and go hire more people without solving other problems, which is the leaky boat problem, which is that you're bailing water out of the boat, but you've got holes all over the place. It doesn't do you any good. I think part of the problem when it comes to the pipeline is part of what you said, which is we go to the same places. We go to the same companies. We go to the same law firms. We go to the same law schools to recruit from, and we're using the same criteria. Our profession tends to be very status-based, and I think that's part of the problem that we have, is that we all want to hire from the Ivies and the top 10 schools and from the same law firms. I think if we think about how we redefine success, as you said, and think about what are the qualifications that actually correlate to finding people who will be successful in your organizations, it's not always, and I'm not saying that people from Harvard, because I know some people in the audience who actually are from Harvard, so not that that's bad, but there's
and on your panel,
and
by
on
the
the
way.
panel, yeah. but that there are other great places as well. So maybe there's not the correlation there that we need to be so focused on. It could be other things. You mentioned grit, other types of indicia of success. Just one last comment. I want to up-level the problem question. Because we talk about the question of diversity and inclusion, how do we improve it, what's the problem? We have to also make sure we understand why we care about this. Because I think too often we just get stuck in this idea of, hey, we want more diversity, but we don't always understand why. And I think everyone probably knows this, but we should, I think, be more clear about it, which is there's the equity piece. You mentioned, Megan, equity. I think it's more than just equity, because I think equity is kind of like going vegetarian because it's healthy. which I think is a great reason if that's why you're vegetarian. But like, at least for me, it's like I want more before I'm going to do it. Like, there's a whole bunch of reasons why. But I think for us, around diversity, I think, the understanding, and I think we talk a lot about this at Facebook, the idea of cognitive diversity, the idea that more different perspectives and backgrounds and experiences improves decision-making, improves performance. And if we do agree on that, and if people understand that, it's not just diversity for the sake of diversity, because we all come from affected groups and feel like, hey, we want our shot too, but the idea that, hey, this is actually going to make the organization better because we have customers and we have clients and we have others who we serve who are in those communities. And if we don't have people who can service that and understand what they're thinking about, we can't provide the best services possible.
And the data definitely bears that out. I'm sure many of you are familiar. There's, been this huge data study about scientific papers and research. And the ones that had very diverse teams, and it was exactly about cognitive and perception and sort of vantage point, had much better sort of results. Their results held up over time, and when you had sort of a singular group, whether it was by nationality or race or gender or something, those standings didn't hold up. I do want to just clarify, when I use the word equity, I have another meaning than the traditional meaning of, it's really a stake. Communities thrive, and I don't know if it was Bernard or David or Alan was talking about this concept of belonging. Communities thrive when people feel like they belong. So I'm stealing somebody's word. And you feel like when you belong, you have an equity stake in the success of it. Otherwise, to just tease you guys, you're just stealing people from eBay, and you're just stealing people from Facebook, and Google's just stealing people from, you're just doing this little roundabout chairs. And so you really have to try to cultivate something where people have a stake in it and want that success. Doesn't mean you're not going to change jobs from Facebook to Google or not, or you're not going to go from Greenwood-Traurig to somewhere else. I did want to say one thing that my firm did, which I thought was really interesting. Because when you look at the data, as Bernard said, people who make partners typically don't come from like the top 5% of their class at Harvard, although they sometimes are that person. It is about both grit and resilience, but we did a program where we started to hire people kind of on I can't remember the title, but they weren't like immediately on an associate track. And they came from all sorts of different places that wouldn't have been traditionally recruited law schools, and looked at the data. And within a year or two, sort of they were reevaluated, did remarkably well, because this was an opportunity for folks who were not going to get a job at quote unquote big law and worked so hard. The other thing is if you're a minority student at one of these top schools, you got a gazillion offers coming at you left, right, center. But if you go into your backyard and you hire somebody from great law schools, Santa Clara, Hastings, local places where people have a stake in their community, their family might live there, their significant other, they're more likely to stay. So I think that's a really important thing for law firms to do, but we should talk much more about in-house because this audience is all in-house.
Yeah. I just wanted to address one question, which is there an elephant in the room about the pipeline issue, meaning that it's going to be diversity equals affirmative action equals lowering of standards and things like that. So did anyone have to comment on that, the perception that some of these diversity initiatives will lead to sort of less qualified attorneys?
Yeah, I think there is sometimes this assumption that if you're intentionally pursuing diverse talent that you have to lower the bar. And it's not lowering the bar at all, right? It's challenging you to really find talent, right? Of course, if someone can check the first 3 boxes, you're going to invite them in. But if you really are intentional about finding strong individuals who will succeed within your organization, you have to work hard at it. You have to find talent. And we really recruit talent very passively in this space, right? OCI is one aspect of it. If we're looking to bring in lateral attorneys or someone shifting from outside counsel and going in-house, it's usually, I've worked alongside them. You don't really work that hard, right? And so there's this fluid process that's very passive, and we need to kind of just challenge ourselves. Stop that, right? You like that person, one, because yes, they do good work, but you like them. And so all we're doing is creating the good old boy network. And if you are not like the other and being welcome to be part of that conversation, you're always going to be excluded. And so we're kind of creating this whole echo chamber for ourselves when it comes to, pipeline and talent. But there is always sometimes this assumption of, I am lowering the bar, or it's affirmative action, or why do we have to focus on this, and so on and so forth. We're trying to get you to find talent because it does exist. And sometimes if you find good talent, you may have a cost savings on it, right? So it depends on your strategies and what your needs are and so on and so forth. But, be intentional. Don't be afraid.
So can I just, sorry, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah. You can go ahead.
So let me just say, I spent, when I was in-house, not in-house, I am in-house now. When I was at the law firm, I spent many, many years doing recruiting for the law firm, and I was the chair of our hiring committee in San Francisco. And, we struggled with this because I came from a firm that had a very high bar. You had to be top of your class to get in. And I was always the advocate for the diverse or female student who perhaps didn't have the grades that were our kind of quote unquote cutoff, but who I felt showed talent and had potential. And I felt there was something that wasn't reflected in the grades that I thought this person could bring to the table. And 9 times out of 10, those attorneys were so grateful for the opportunity. And you talk about grit, and you talk about dedication, and you talk about hard work and work ethic. Like these candidates all had that. And to me, the potential that someone shows is, in my mind, more important than the grades that are reflected on paper, because that just means you test well. And people who test well, who may be very, very bright, may not make the best lawyers. I mean, that's just a fact. And so, in my opinion, really making the effort to get to know somebody's, during the interview process, getting to know them. We used to read everybody's writing samples. We used to call references, which I know is kind of like old school. Like nobody does that anymore. And I think the firm continues to do that. I've now instilled that practice at Uber, where I want to know everything I can know about this individual. I want to know what they're like as a colleague. I want to know how hard they work. I want to know everything that this person can bring to the new roles. And so I've actually inserted myself into our interview process. And as Ruby knows, she's one of our leaders at Uber. I will interview almost every single finalist before they get an offer, because I want to make sure that they are, the type of person who we are bringing in, because we do have a high bar at Uber. We are kind of, we want the most talented lawyers, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're coming from, a top law firm or, another, technology company. It really means what does this person have to offer that we are, that what can they bring to the company? And also talk about diversity of opinions, of ideas, what are we missing from, our lawyers or our team that this person is going to be, we call it culture add.
Actually, was going to then turn to sort of, since you just talked about hiring, I was going to drill down.
I think we just had one question over there.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I don't want to make you off track. I wanted to ask though that many of the technology companies here today are renowned for having really thorough interviewing processes. And among those, and I worked at Google Providers, among those is the culture fit of people. So, I'm wondering how does a different law school, a different race, a different ethnicity, a different gender, not being male, fit into that interview process? Is that accounted for in the process? And then the second thing I wanted to ask is, given, I don't know which of you said that the top layer is not likely to change soon, what's being done at that level to extend themselves to minority and people of color candidates and people who have been hired, I should say?
So I was the one who made that point. And I think there's a couple things. So first of all, from the interview process, we have, at least at Uber, we want to make sure that we are recruiting folks from all sorts of different backgrounds. So, and that's honestly part of the reason why I'm part of the process, because I get to see every team who they're trying to bring on. And if I'm seeing a lot of white males coming through, I'm saying, no, let's pause this hiring process. Let's, what's going on? Is this a pipeline issue? Are we not getting any women or minorities applying for this role? Why is that? In one instance, we actually went back and rewrote the job description, because when I read it, we actually had somebody else read it who's kind of knowledgeable about these things, and said, it's too aggressive, it's too hard charging, you're not going to really attract a diverse pool of talent. So we went back and we rewrote the job description and reposted it. So that's one thing we've done. In terms of the leadership thing, the leadership changing, I really do think you have to be intentional about that. And for our company, and it started at the top, so with our CEO, he brought in Tony West, our chief legal officer, who is African American. He then brought me in. We have a really diverse leadership team. Ruby is one of those leaders. We are about 56% women, 40% attorneys of color. So at the leadership team. So that's like I think there's 14, 15 of us total. If you count Tony, it's 15. But I think you have to be very intentional about looking for that talent. And if you're bringing in candidates who are not diverse, who are predominantly white men, you have to really pause and take a look at why is this? Why is it that we're not getting applicants who are of diverse backgrounds?
And just to follow up on that, if you love sports, you might know of the Rooney Rule, which was implemented at the NFL. So if they had to have somebody in a leadership position, either in management or the coach, they had to interview at least one diverse candidate. And it had remarkable results in a pretty short time. So the legal industry in about 2016-17 opted into something called the Mansfield Rule, which I think is named after a woman lawyer. And that said,
First licensed lawyer.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
She's the first woman to be licensed to practice law.
Thank you. And so the Mansfield Rule says that when you are considering promotions, whether it's for equity partner or practice group or office group leaders or the executive committee or the board that runs a law firm, that 30% of the folks that you are considering have to be of diverse backgrounds. And so there's a bunch of law firms that went in the first round. It was the Mansfield Rule 1.0, and now they're at 2.0, and now they might be at 3.0. And what they did on the other side, and I'd love to hear, because some of these companies participate, in 2019 now they're doing a forum that if law firms get an accreditation that they meet the Mansfield Rule, then they get to participate in, kind of a high-level, high-touch meet and greet with big-name companies. And that makes a difference.
So I'll add, the reason why they went with 30% is that when you have, if you have a candidate pool of 10 people and you have one diverse individual, the likelihood of that person getting through the process is slim, right? Because they just stand out. But when you create a nice talent pool where you have at least a minimum of 30%, there's just a different psychology in the way folks start to interview the talent pool. And therefore, there's the differentials that we will kind of immediately kind of spot, whether it's race, gender, ethnicity, or diversity of thought. Some of that stuff gets shifted. And the bigger piece is that, what we appreciate from the Mansfield Rule, it forces the firms, it's forced us to really look at our talent. It's challenged us to ensure that we are doing what we need to do to make sure that we are grooming and developing individuals for those next level opportunities, whether it's partnership or management committee or any of those leadership committees. Those are the conversations we should have naturally been having. But in a firm setting, there's always the excuse, and we always want to excuse ourselves out of something. So Mansfield has definitely kickstarted and challenged firms to step up in a way, and I know that they've extended it now to companies. Legal departments are also now stepping up and challenging themselves, because legal departments are also dealing with some similar issues around elevation and also recruiting talent. So, yeah.
I think one of the...
I just want to go back to your point about the cultural fit again. It was kind of interesting to me. I actually don't really like that word, and so because here we're talking about diversity, right, and diversity in all aspects, but then we're talking about fit, right? Fit doesn't make sense to me, and so whenever I have team members, colleagues that maybe have interviewed someone and come back and say, well, I just don't think they were the right fit. I always press them on it. Like, what do you mean? Like, did they not look at you in your eye when you were interviewing? Like, what? I mean, what are you talking about? And a lot of times when I have those conversations, like, it really, it brings it down a level to really try to figure out like what was wrong with the candidate where you felt that they could not work here.
To me, one of the big points here is that you have to be intentional, right?
Yeah.
Nothing's going to change unless we're intentional. I think we've got some challenges, though, in terms of doing this. One is it's easy to relate to people that are more like you. So you meet someone, you talk to someone, it's someone who's a mother, who's working mother. You have things in common, and you develop an affinity. You're white male, you're African American male. I mean, you're looking for certain things, and so you've got to be able to think beyond sort of who you are and what you would relate to. One of the things we have to watch out for is what you might call a minority tax, which is that if we're going to put people on the interview panels who are diverse, if it's the same people over and over and over, then they're having to interview 30 people, whereas other people only have to interview 5 or 6, and so all of a sudden it's a burden. You're the not token, but you're the woman. I think Sheryl Sandberg talks about this in her book, and others have talked about when she and Marissa Mayer were the only 2 women, or maybe it was Susan Wojcicki at Google. They had her interview all the women engineers who came through. So that's a heavy burden. The last thing I think is super important here, and this is the hardest part, I think, is people need to be willing to take risk. What's safe is to hire Harvard top 5% of their class. It's easy. It's like buying from IBM. What's harder is to sort of go recruit from law schools that are not the traditional powerhouse law schools that you've decided, and you're going to take this risk and say, you know what? I've interviewed the person. I've talked to references. I've gotten to know this person. I think this person adds a lot to our team and has all of the traits that we care about. They're collaborative. They communicate well, and all those things. They can think big. Are you willing to do that? Are hiring managers willing to do it? Are all of you willing to do that? That becomes ultimately the question, because it's always easy to play safe. It's harder to sort of be that person to take the risk.
I just wanted to add too that, Mr. Mazzella, yes. Tell us, teach us, school us.
No.
I'm anxious to hear your comments.
Because I've been through the whole cycle. I'm older than you guys, okay? It's this. I don't know how, it's not just the pipeline question. Because most people who are people of color or women are often overqualified for the jobs they apply.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay? So it's not a matter of that. It's that they walk into a situation where people are judging them. You're right, it's a natural inclination to feel affinity to people who you think are like you.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're trying to teach people how to value people who are not part of your culture, but still of value, that's a very hard thing to do. So what I wanted to know is, I've been at law firms, been in big organizations where if, and I don't mean to sound harsh, but if it's a typical white male partner and they're developing a white male associate, if they say, oh, I see that you're weak in writing, I need to give you more of that. So it's the combination of support, development, and advocacy for young lawyers, no matter where they come from. Because what happens is that they'll hire someone who doesn't look like them. I don't care where they went to law school. If they didn't go to what the traditional is, then non-traditional means negative to them, or a discount. And then they put them in a situation where if it's an Asian lawyer, I said, you're a really good researcher, I'm going to put you in front of the client, and if they have a bad reaction, their reaction is, see, I told you so. So I don't have an obligation to develop them so that they can improve their client skills. Or if it's a woman that and she doesn't understand the time that's required to do a particular assignment. See, I told you she was not serious about being here. So how do we change those perceptions? Because so that people who are in positions of power don't feel uncomfortable about support, advocacy, and development of all talent.
So can I take that
Yeah.
a little bit?
And I have some.
I'm going to use a popular term, disruptors. And, at Goodwin, we have disruptors that sit on a lot of our committees, allocations, partnership, the attorney review committee, and so on and so forth. And their role is to point things out. So if we start to talk about an associate and their performance, and all of a sudden it's starting to go south, their partners, and even myself would say, wait, hold on, did we have a conversation with this individual? Did we give them feedback? And if we didn't, what is the plan forward? Because we're making a decision on someone's livelihood because of an hiccup. And so that's one way. And culturally, what I've experienced, and I've been at Goodwin for about 18 months, is I found partners just calling it out. Like they say, maybe it's my bias. I may not be seeing this clearly. So they're actually asking for others to weigh in on their point of view because they recognize they're starting to go down a path. And those are the things that are very key and critical because, again, it doesn't matter if, that committee is diverse in itself because at some point you get groupthink. And we always tend to want to go with the group. What we really need to be is have folks who are really grounded and really challenging us. Are we making the right decision on hiring candidate X? What is the additive pieces of this person's background, skill set, thinking, whatever, that they're bringing to the team that's going to really, take us to the next level? If it's talking about elevating someone to that partnership level, like what is it? Like what else do they need if they've already been at bat several times? Why are we having this conversation, right? This should be a slam dunk. We should just move forward. And that's the issue. And that's you said earlier, tone at the top. And it has to start at the top. And we have to hold each other accountable. And I will say one of the things that made Goodwin an attractive organization is our chair ran on his platform for becoming chair of the firm was on diversity. It wasn't about, we're gonna focus on, business development, things of that nature. It's really on diversity, right? And so once you have that, it's kind of kicked down deep into the organization where everyone is aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it, right? It's no longer this blind spot, we have staff that will focus on it and I can go back to doing what I'm doing. No, you have a team that's gonna hold you accountable and nudge you. And if we challenge everyone to kind of call it out, that's what we need, right? This is hand-to-hand combat, intimate relationships, the day-to-day experiences that you all have, whether it's someone talking to you inappropriately or whatever the case may be. Those are the things. It's not always a big program that's fancy that we kind of, submit something for an award. It's really person by person, and that's where diversity and inclusion really gets the challenge and traction, and how we really drive success. It's not,
Yeah. I'm going to actually go a step further because I feel like, given the number of in-house lawyers in this room, I feel like we can actually be more impactful than we think on that issue. This is a business imperative for law firms. The same way that, if I look at my legal department, we're over 360 people, and we are incredibly diverse. I demand that of my outside counsel. And if either I or our CLO typically have to approve any new engagements. So I want to know who the team is, who is leading the team, and if it's not a woman or a diverse lawyer, I ask why. And if they tell me, there's a diverse associate on the team, it's like, you can't tell me you can't find a law firm that can bring us a diverse, or a female to lead this team. Go back and look. And so we are very intentional about it, and I do feel like we can really help for those people who are at law firms who actually don't get it. They're like, they don't look like me. Once it starts to hit their pocketbook, they will start paying attention to this. And that's the one thing that I learned when I was at the law firm. And I had, frankly, I owed a lot of my success to in-house lawyers who helped me out. And the way that they do it is by driving business to those diverse lawyers. And for me, I've had phone calls with chairs of firms. Tony, our CLO, has had phone calls with chairs of firms about somebody who was a non-equity partner saying, hey, she's fantastic. I would hire her for any of these types of matters. And right around the time that, the partnership decisions are being made, and we will advocate as clients to the if possible, or if needed, the chair of the firm to say what a wonderful person this is, and I'll hire this person again. And the same thing, if that person leaves, they're going to take our business with them. I mean, hopefully we never have to go that far, but the reality is we have to be intentional also about helping those who are in-house, because once you start demanding, telling people, you know what, you didn't bring us a diverse team, so we're going to go with another law firm. They will start developing those diverse lawyers who are, junior. They will start investing in them because they need to. Because if they don't, they're not going to get our business. So I think one of the things is I was very passionate about this when I was at the law firm. And now I feel like I can actually be more impactful because, I can sit down and have those conversations. I've had meetings with people who come and they pitch business to me, and I'm like, okay, well, tell me about your diversity efforts. And then they're, and they say something, and I'd say, okay, well, here's a white man speaking to me. He brings another white man. I don't know. Next time, bring one of your diverse lawyers. Bring me one of your female partners. I'd like to meet them. So it's one of these things where I think if we're not calling them out on it, then there really isn't. It's going to be even more time before any substantial progress is made. And I feel like anything we can do to really push law firms and really help move the needle is important.
Yeah, and then just to piggyback off of your point, Tammy, eBay, we did this exact same analysis, and we went back and forth on, how stringent it should be, but we landed upon, for any engagement with a law firm, 35% of your timekeepers must be underrepresented minority or women. That actually built to the matters, and we're holding firms accountable for that. Not to say that we're necessarily going to take away the work immediately, but we're going to work with you to figure out how to get you to that 35% or above.
So there's a number of issues here I just want to just touch on real quick because we're trying to address it at Facebook, all these things. So one is the comment in the back about, you set people up, you give them the opportunity, and then they fail, and you say, see, I told you so. So that's confirmation bias. We have these beliefs, and then we seek out things that confirm what we already believe. And so that's a form of, and there's many, of unconscious bias. So one of the things we are doing at Facebook right now, and in 2 weeks is, I think, the deadline, is we have a goal for the entire legal department to take our managing bias training. So we have managed bias training we have for the whole company. We looked at the legal department. We saw it was something like 50% or so had taken it. We said, all right, and this is toned from the top, and this is, I think, what others are saying too, is that it has to come from leadership. Leadership has to say, this matters, and here's what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. So we've got a goal that end of H2, which is end of June, 100% of the legal department has to have taken managing bias. So we can address and create awareness around unconscious bias. On the law firm thing, I think this is the thing that every in-house company says, and it's the easy part, which is to say, hey, make our firms do something about it. The hard part becomes, how do you do that? So, we've been gathering data over the last 2 years. We have similar requirements around, 35% of our matters have to be, staffed by diverse people, and we have requirements in terms of what percentage also they need to be handling significant leadership roles in those matters. And for the first time, we're gathering that data, we're pushing it back to our law firms and telling them, here's where you ranked when we came up with an algorithm, we came up with a score. You are number 43 out of 50. You suck.
We do something similar.
Yeah, so we're doing that right now. We're recognizing the very top firms who've done well, and we're going to go public in the next month in terms of who they are, just to sort of give them sort of this is the carrot part. Yep. At the same time, the stick part, which is the hardest part, which is, are you really willing to take away work? Right. The first thing you've got to do if you're going to set this up is have the conversation so that you don't feel bad that you didn't signal this to them. But number two, you got to build a second source. So what we found is time and time again, whether it was at Google or other places, was that when we're ready to pull the work, the people who worked on it said, we can't do that. we need them. They're the only firm that handles this. We're like, oh my God, how do we get in this situation? So you got to build a second source. One of the Bernard, you talked about sort of, and we talked about belonging. One of the things we're really focused on is within our department of 700 people, can we create communities within the larger community? So how do we create belonging within the blacks, within the legal department, and within the Hispanics, within the Asians? And so we've got these different ERGs just within legal. And we're building sort of that community, making them really articulate what's your purpose. Why do you get together? What are the challenges that are common that you face that you can get together, and let's talk about them. Create a place of belonging. And then last thing I'd say is that what we need more than anything is this is not a problem that's going to be solved by people of color for ourselves. This is a problem that's going to be solved by everybody. So we need allies. And so what we need to do is recruit. It's kind of reverse recruiting. You know, it's not recruiting the diverse people. It's recruiting the people in the majority to say how they can help. But I think there's a lot of people who want to help, and we haven't done a great job of explaining to them what they need to do. So I think this is a lot of at least what we're trying to do.
Can I just add one thing for all you in-house folks? I think you guys need to just have the conversation, because I wanted to kind of really stress that. Not just you didn't hit the mark, we're potentially going to take something away, but have the conversation as to what you're looking for and what you recognize as the opportunity for firms to really develop their talent. And firms will respond in finding talent or developing and grooming, but if you're taking work away, then they're just going to, it's like losing a pitch. Oh, well, okay, we'll just move on to the next thing. And so this is an industry issue, so it needs to be a client, corporation, whatever. We need to partner in this in a very unique way. We need to have a bold conversation about what can we do. And if there is an opportunity, you can find the bright spot in partnering, do it, right? Don't just take the work away. Don't ignore the opportunity of educating individuals who've been walking this earth for 40 and 50 years, and diversity means something very different to them.
So I'm going to disagree with you, Bernard.
Sure. All right.
Because I'm sorry, but if you don't take the work away, then nothing's going to change. And I feel very strongly. And the way you don't get into the problem to begin with is you really stress to your teams, like this matters to the leaders. You have to go out and find diverse teams to work on these matters. And frankly, we've talked about different ways to make sure that we're holding our teams accountable. If they get into that situation where, somebody's numbers are not great because, a particular team hasn't done a good job of recruiting diverse outside counsel, we're going to hold the in-house lawyers accountable for that, because that's also their responsibility. So, to me, I'm not going to, if somebody comes to me with a very talented group of folks, I'm a big believer that, yes, there are certain niche practice areas where there are very few people who can do the work. But if you really look, you could find diverse lawyers to do just about any type of work and who are specialized. So I'm a big believer in, if I've already told you that diversity is important to our company, and I've already told you that, we're looking for diverse teams, and you bring me an all-white male team, you're just not going to get the work. And that just tells me that that's also a reflection of if your client has told you something and you are not being responsive to what they have shared with you, that's on you.
No, that part I totally agree.
And so, to me, it's like if we're going to take away work, something must have happened, because hopefully maybe there was some attrition, whatever. And yes, in those instances, we should have a conversation and partner. What can I do? How can I support your diversity efforts? And I have those conversations all the time. I go and I speak to law firms. We invite their summer associates to come and visit our company and tour our company. And we will do a lot to try to support the law firms that we work with in their diversity efforts. But, we really expect them to respond. And, and I think for me, it's unless companies are very serious about putting their money where their mouth is, I just think that, you're gonna fall into this trap where, the old school folks are just gonna be like, we'll just go find another company, or it's just not.
One thing I think would be great if you guys followed up on the data is you're doing the data on measuring the inputs, like are they bringing you a diverse team? Are you spending 35% of the time on that? There's anecdotal data that actually goes back to this diverse scientists come up with a better product. You're going to have enough data to show at some point whether or not it's actually better for both sides of the business. Because there is data that used to show that women were more efficient in their timekeeping and their delivery of services. And so I would love for the big, my ask as a partner at a law firm is to go back and start to look at the data on results. Because one of the things that you hear a little bit of pushback is, but well, yeah, but are we getting the best results? Whether that's from in-house people fearing that 0 error rate, you're not allowed to have any errors. You guys, none of us. Everybody else can have multiple errors, but you can't have any. So I think it'd be great to start to have, and this is the heart of where this could happen is in the Silicon Valley, is to start to get the data on efficiencies and outcomes. And obviously it's difficult to measure outcome. Litigation and transactional stuff, it's going to have different stuff, but it would be really great to see that data.
I think the other aspect, or to add to that, is really tracking people's progress, right? So if there's a Mary or Jamal or Jerome that has worked on your matters for several years, you should be engaging with the firms to say, well, how are they doing, right? Or they're doing very well, and I don't see them on a matter right now, so what's going on, right? To really point that out, right? That's where we can kind of develop, that's the developing talent. That's investing in a relationship. If we're just looking at every year you're running the numbers and you're getting data from, firms, my peers, we pull our hairs out just because we got to respond to a request, but there's never feedback. There's never a true partnership where people are really challenging us and challenging our leaders to do what they need to do. And I think this is just universal practice. So having the conversation and really doubling down beyond just the zeros and the ones, but the people, because those are the individuals who become partners because of the work that you give, and you challenge them, and you're willing to help grow with them to take that risk and give those really big, career advancing opportunities. I think that's key critical.
I think we're a little bit out of time. I just wanted to just say that why do the law firms matter to you? They matter a lot, and I've learned this having gone back and forth. The law firms have tremendous input into when your GC says, I'm looking for a really good associate, who do you know? These partners and these GCs are they're like this little ecosystem. Like the partners came from this firm, they go become GC at this firm, they bring talent in, when they get laid off or whatever, if there's management change, they may go back to their law firm to say, hey, who needs a GC? So this stuff is really important because when I was a junior, when I was, low-level person in-house, I don't care, how diverse they are. I'm in-house. I've crossed over into the promised land. I don't care what the farther up you get, you realize these are your advocates. There's a symbiotic system between the law firms and these companies, a la Tony West, Eric Holder. I'm in D.C. Covington is a huge D.C. law firm. They have a lot of power in terms of political appointments, figuring out, where you can get a job. I mean, they know the boards. They know their venture capitalists. So some of the stuff is that making sure that you're the diverse panel that you hire, they look like you. One day you may get laid off or let go, and then who are you going to call? Maybe the partner at a big firm to say, who's hiring? Who needs this secondment? Where can you place me? So all the system sort of works in yours to the, I've seen sort of the good old white boy network. That's how they hook each other up. They don't get laid off and sort of have this sort of holding period where they're consulting. They land into another position. It's how are you guys doing this? I'm out here hoofing it and taking these bullshit jobs, and you get another GC job and you fail up. How is this happening? So I just wanted to just leave that with you to just say you have a lot of power in your organizations, and that the law firm sort of numbers and metrics and diversity really will begin to affect you the higher up you ascend. So I'll close with that. Anyway, thank you for your time.